Ms. Williams, are you okay?
Yes, Chairperson.
Thank you very much. You
Thank
may
you,
proceed.
Chair. Ms. Williams, you've described for us how difficult it was to receive this treatment from Minister Mutambi. May I take you to page 59 of Exhibit F1? This page, as I understand it, is a notice from yourself to Mr. Dipoko of your early retirement, and it is dated 31 August 2016. Can you please tell us about this letter and how it relates to the news you got in the middle of August or thereabouts that these functions were going to be taken away from you?
Chairperson, indeed, I had actually filed this report because my health was failing me and I was not coping. And with all the support that I was getting, I didn't want to go to the doctor because my fear was that I would have to relate my pain. So I then opted to say I want to take the early retirement so that I can make my whole situation get better.
But if you go over the page, Ms. Williams, to page 60, there is a letter dated only a matter of days later, the 5th of September, in which, as I read it, you withdraw your notice of early retirement. Why would you do that?
Chairperson, if I may say that after I had filed my notice, I had to dig deep in my inner soul that whether am I doing the right thing or not. I had to dig deep to establish what made me strong in the tortures that I went through when they wanted me to be an askari. I then realized that I'm selling my country, and let alone failing my children who look up to me, except for music. I think they don't look up to me. I had to get myself out of the system that I'm dealing with a minister here. I had to get out in my system that I'm dealing with an ANC cadre. I had to accept that I'm dealing with the enemy that is coming to steal in our country. And I woke up in the middle of the night and I drafted my withdrawal and I said, I'm not going back. I'm going back to work to do what I had been passionate about. And that is why I filed my reversal.
Ms. Hoffman, I'm sorry. I think you have touched on something that you might wish to give us an idea about, or just explain in one or two lines, and it's really a matter that I would leave in your own judgment. Because when you spoke earlier on before the break about your torture, I got the impression that you had been tortured physically at some stage in the past, and you were viewing what you say Minister Mutambi was doing to you as another torture. So I wasn't sure before the break whether to ask you more, but you have now referred to something about being required to turn into an askari or whatever. I don't know if there's anything you would like to say about that.
Chairperson, I was an ANC activist. I was arrested in 1998. And that
1998?
1988, sorry.
1988?
88.
Okay.
And I had to go through weeks of torture because they wanted me to turn against my comrades at the time. And I should say that I was arrested by a former ANC MK cadre called September. I was arrested in Soweto, but I was tortured in Piet Retief. Chairperson, throughout my life, I've never ever thought I would have to relive that situation because it was never a nice experience. But I think the effects of my torture, which I had thought would never ever have to come back, I found myself having those facial twitches, which came as a result of torture. I found myself having to go through those panic attacks at night, where you wake up shivering, thinking you had a cell being open, and you then don't fall asleep immediately after that. You think they are coming, and they don't come. And in the morning, you then wake up and you have to go to work. And you get to the office, you can't tell anyone, this is what you are going through. I had those panic attacks, which even a car in the street, when it was, a hoot, would just trigger it. And all those symptoms, Chairperson, they had already gone because I had to go through medication and everything. But I found myself slipping through to that situation where I had to get the medication again. And that's the experience that I had thought was sealed in my heart. It would never have to be reopened. But little did I realize that it will be opened by the very same people who call themselves comrade, the same people who claim to be from the ANC that I was from also. And they are the ones who did this to me. I think I was almost shattered. But Chairperson, as I said, that the reason I withdrew my retirement, I had to ask myself a question: how did I manage the torture and not to sell, and ended up being sentenced to 7 years? What is it? And I think, Chairperson, I came with one conclusion, that the reason I couldn't sell out is because I was so passionate with what I was struggling for. And I was also accepting the fact that these are not my friends, these are the boys that are coming to torture me. But in the case of public service, I had to accept that this is not a minister, this is an enemy. That's what really helped me. I don't think that woman was interested in serving the people of South Africa. I don't think that woman was interested in preserving the resources of this country. And that's why I then said that I will be failing the people of South Africa if I allow the thief to get away with it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Williams, you gave notice of the withdrawal of your early retirement, as I have it at page 60 on the 5th of September. And then if you go over the page to page 61, that appears to be an acknowledgement of receipt of the withdrawal of your retirement from Mr. Dipoko. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chairperson.
And could you please read into the record what he says at paragraph 2 of that acknowledgement of receipt of the withdrawal of your retirement?
The last line says, your continued dedication to the work of GCIS is appreciated.
If I may then go back to your correspondence with the minister, because as I have it in the chronology, you put in the notice of early retirement. You then withdraw it a matter of days later, and that is acknowledged on the 5th of September 2016 by Mr. Dipoko. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
Your letter of grievance to the minister, which we looked at a moment ago, which is at page 39.1, is then dated later in September. It's the 27th of September 2016.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
The one that's dated, it's 40, page 40?
No, 39.1 should be 2 pages back. And that, as I have it, is your letter to the minister.
That's correct.
After the early retirement and withdrawal.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
That's right.
And this is the one we were looking at before the adjournment,
Okay.
where you take up the issue of redundancy. 70% of your functions have been removed, and it was done so without consultation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then if you go over the page to page 40, you have Minister Mutambi's, as I read this document, response to your letter. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Could you tell us over the page at page 41 the date of that document from Minister Mutambi?
It's on the 5th of October, 2016.
At paragraph 1 on page 40, she deals with what she thought was your departure from GCIS. Can you take us through what she says there?
I have noted the contents of your letter dated the 27th of September 2016 on the above subject. I am surprised to receive your grievance after having considered your letter of termination of services with GCIS dated 31st of August, which I directed the acting DG to accept.
That appears not to have happened.
I didn't.
Do you know why?
Chairperson, I had already withdrawn my early retirement. In fact, I didn't even resign, as she seems to be understood, because my notice was a notice to apply for the early retirement. I did not resign. I don't know what was she talking about.
Ms. Williams?
I'm sorry. So she may have understood your notice of early retirement as meaning that you were resigning.
Yes, Chairperson, and probably she even bought a champagne. And
Thank you.
Ms. Williams, at paragraph 2 of the minister's letter.
I'm sorry again, Ms. Hofmeyer. If you resign and if you occupy the position of Deputy Director General and you resign, who is supposed to accept your resignation to the extent that one needs to talk about an acceptance of resignation? Is it the DG? Is it the minister? Is it the president? Who is it?
it's supposed to be the Director General, not her.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. At paragraph 2 on page 40, the minister deals with her reasons for stripping you of 70% of your functions and ensuring that you were, in essence, and these are my words, excommunicated from the reporting line between the CFO and the then acting DG of the time. Who was the CFO at the time that these functions were removed from you?
It was Mr. Mzwanele Manyi.
Is he the same Mr. Momeko whom you testified about on Friday, having bullied the supply chain management representatives within GCIS in August 2014 about the payment to TNA Media for the SABC breakfast?
Yes, Chairperson, it's the same person.
And as I read paragraph 2, and you'll tell me if I'm incorrect, the minister is grounding her decision to take these functions from you in Treasury Regulations 2.1.1, 2.1.2, and 2.1.3. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
What did you make of her explanation based on these regulations for taking 70% of your functions away?
Chairperson, I think the minister doesn't even seem to understand that those Treasury regulations have got a subsequent documentation that Treasury provided, which is called a CFO handbook. It goes to explain the essence of what the Treasury regulation is saying, that it seeks to ensure that the accounting officer of a department has a line of sight with the budget that he or she has been entrusted with. And in our case, we had that line of sight as prescribed by National Treasury, and it was in the form of a budget committee. The Director General, on a monthly basis, without fail, he would convene a CFO together with the 3 DDGs and engage. It was not even a separate part of the management meeting, but it was a separate dedicated to discuss the finances. So there was a line of sight as expected by the PFMA.
Ms. Williams, I note from paragraph 2 of the Minister's letter that she doesn't refer to clause 3.2.9 of the Treasury regulations. If you go back to page 39, you will see that at page 39, when Mr. Dipoko advised you of this rearrangement of your functions, he said that he had been directed by the Minister in terms of clauses 2.1.2 and 3.2.9 to require this direct engagement between himself and the CFO. Do you know why the Minister omitted clause 3.2.9 from her letter at page 40?
I don't know, Chair.
Do you know what clause 3.2.9 of the Treasury regulation says?
I would have to be reminded.
Indeed, and maybe if you will permit me, I'll do so. Regulation 3.2.9 says an internal audit must be independent with no limitation on its access to information. Ms. Williams, on what basis could that have been a reason to remove your functions from you?
Chairperson, maybe I should even have said that. I think the other day when I was presenting, the chief internal auditor had been removed by Mr. Manyi. It's one of the first functions that he decided to take and be responsible for the media buying and the internal audit. So at this point, the internal audit was no longer reporting to me, it was reporting to Mr. Manyi. So I would imagine that probably they picked up that they made a mistake and that's why they didn't make reference to it.
Thank you. If you go over the page to page 41, this is the second page of the Minister's letter. At paragraph 4, she deals with your concern about the redundancy that had now resulted pursuant to her instruction that all of these functions be removed from you. And she records there, and I quote at paragraph 4, on the part of redundancy, it cannot be correct that the changes have resulted in the redundancy of your position because your conditions of service have not been negatively affected. However, you will agree with me that that financial management and supply chain management are core functions of the Chief Financial Officer. Could we break that up into 2 parts? That section before the however, what do you make of the Minister's contention that this wasn't an issue of redundancy because your conditions of service had not been negatively affected?
Chairperson, the response by the Minister actually shocked me because it has no regard whatsoever of the taxpayers' money. To her, it's not a problem to continue to pay me for doing almost like 30% of the work that I was being paid, and to her, it's okay. It doesn't matter. We haven't tampered with your salary, but you can continue doing less because it's not her money. It's the taxpayers' money, and that's what shocked me.
And then she goes on in the second part of that sentence to solicit an agreement from you that the financial management and supply chain management are core functions of the Chief Financial Officer. Do you agree with her, and did you agree with her, that those functions should no longer appropriately be reporting to you?
Chairperson, I don't agree because I don't think Minister, together with head acting DG, took the trouble to understand how the organization is structured. It was not about CFO, it was not about supply chain, it was a whole suite, which is how we were structured. And if they had bothered themselves to consult me, I probably would have explained it to them that those functions don't strictly fall within the regulation that they are quoting. And secondly, it is not possible, it's not correct that the CFO is not accountable to the accounting officer because at the time, from 1998, the CFO has been accounting to the DG. So the whole thing, you could see that it's just an attempt to get this supplier chain and the finances to be in the hands of somebody that they can manipulate.
And Ms. Hofmeyer, just one more clarification. You were asked, Ms. Williams, for your comment on Minister Mutambi's paragraph 4, where she said that the changes had not affected your conditions of service, and your response was limited to the fact that you said she seemed not to have any concern that you were being paid a full salary for doing 30% of the duties attached to your post. What do you say about her assertion that the changes did not affect your conditions of service?
Thank you very much, Chair, for bringing me back. I think I did say, attach my letter of appointment, which I did point out that it changes my conditions of employment because my letter dated the 8th of May 2009 had the whole suite of these things. So it's necessarily, it was changing my conditions of employment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Williams, if we can return to your statement then at page 9 of Exhibit F1. Ms. Williams, at paragraph 32 on that page, you talk about an event in July 2016 where you were invited to an interview by Minister Mutambi in her office on the 14th of July. Please can you take the chair through those events?
Chairperson, I received a correspondence from the minister's office where they were inviting me for an interview of the post of the deputy of the Director General. Yeah.
And if you go to page 42 of Exhibit F1, is that the invitation you received?
Yes, Chairperson, that's the one.
And what was your response to that invitation?
Chairperson, what I indicated is that, firstly, I had not applied for the post. At that point, I had not applied. Secondly, I have never been invited for an interview by a chief of staff. The way I understand human resources in the GCIS, the head of human resources is the one that will invite you. So necessarily, I then responded to say I have not applied and I am not interested in the invitation.
And to your knowledge, was that interview process ever concluded and an appointment made?
I don't know. All I know is that the post is still vacant, and the GCIS Human Resources, which I was responsible for human resources, was never ever contacted. So nobody knew about this whole attempt for these interviews. Human Resources was not responsible. I don't know what happened to that interview process.
Did you get to know whether there were any other candidates who were invited to interviews at the same time or more or less around that time for the same position?
In fact, Chairperson, I can even say before I even responded, I did phone HR. And they were blank, they were not aware of anything. So I don't even know who applied, who shortlisted, who the candidate was, and I don't know anything about that. But all I know is that the post is still vacant now.
How was your relationship with Minister Mutambi around the time of this invitation?
It was strained. She was not interacting with me at all. She was interacting with the acting Director General. Well,
Ms. Hofmeyer will tell me if it's something she is still coming to. I just find it strange if you have a situation where you have a strained relationship, she invites you for an interview for promotion, and nobody else is invited, is shortlisted or will be interviewed for the position. On the face of it, leave out the question of whether proper procedures are followed. It appears that you are being offered an opportunity to be the only candidate. Do you understand what I mean? I don't know whether you want to comment on this line of thinking that I'm having at the moment.
Chairperson, that's precisely why I didn't apply, because I had strained relations. I wasn't quite sure how she proposes to work with me. At that time, she was not even interacting with me. So I think that's basically what my view was, that I don't see why I should be applying for this post. Yeah.
And you never got to know what the reason behind was for you being the only person being invited to an interview and no one else?
Chairperson, I don't know whether there were other people.
Yes.
All I know is that I got a letter. It may be that they did have other people, I don't know, but human resources also did not know.
Oh, but did you say that the normal procedure would be that the Human Resources Department would know of other candidates?
Yes, Chairperson.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Thank you. In relation to that process for advertising, Ms. Williams, I referred you earlier to the regulations, the public service regulations that talk about advertisements for posts within the public administration. Do you understand that those advertisements have to take place in an open and transparent manner? And do you have details about what must happen in the advertising process that you can enlighten us on?
Chairperson, the way, I will explain it the way we do it currently in the GCIS. When a post becomes vacant, we advertise it in the main newspapers, which is prescribed. And when the advert closes, we then appoint a selection committee, which then processes all the application and try and shortlist the ones that are close enough to the requirements. And on the basis of that, the chairperson of the evaluation committee will then decide who are the three that will then be interviewed. But there's generally a prior setting up of these structures. Once the advert is out, the evaluation committee is appointed in writing, and the panel that will interview is also signed off. It is a panel that gets signed off. So that whole process, I wasn't aware of it. And even at a director general level, the human resources in GCIS or in the department participates in that shortly. It ensures that the ministers set up an evaluation committee, because even there at a DG level, there should be an evaluation committee. Even if it's the same committee that ends up interviewing, it has to be appointed formally, and then they agree on the shortlisted candidates, and then they invite. That whole secretariat process is done by the head of HR. And also on the day of the interviews, in terms of the procedure, the head of HR sits and becomes a scribe for those interviews. And in this particular case, it was not done that way.
I don't know whether one can speak of headhunting somebody within a department. Is it not that you are being headhunted? And if you are headhunted, do those procedures that you have just said, do they apply?
Chairperson, even if you are headhunted, as the process as I know it, you can't be headhunted alone. There should be some kind of a process, and human resources normally drives that process. It will headhunt maybe 3 or 4 candidates and then put them into a shortlisted, but the committee still should exist, and the committee that interviews should still exist, and the head of HR should form part of the secretariat of that process.
Oh, I thought that the concept of headhunting, where it does apply, it's where a minister or whoever is the appointing authority or DG is allowed to just look for somebody and identify that person and dispense with various procedural issues, requirements, because maybe that person is very suitable, and maybe there is no one else that seems available to meet the requirements of the post or something like that. But you are saying even if you headhunt, those procedures must still be complied with.
Yes, Chairperson, if I may say also, the condition for you to do the headhunting, you must have started with a normal advertising, open it up to the market, shortlist, and you're not getting a suitable candidate, and you can then, which is what happened with Mr. Dipoko. So you must have completed that process, and then you can then headhunt. You can hunt 1 or 2, but still there should be a panel that interviews.
Thank you.
Chair, just to be of assistance to close off this aspect, at page 162 of Exhibit F1 is the relevant Regulation 65 of the Public Service Regulations that deals with advertising. And consistent with the testimony that we've heard from Ms. Williams, and I'll just highlight a few examples. Regulation 65(1) says, an executive authority shall ensure that vacant posts in the department are advertised as efficiently and effectively as possible to reach the entire pool of potential applicants, including designated groups. It then goes on over the page at 162 sub 4 of Regulation 65 to record that an executive authority shall advertise any other vacant post as a minimum within the department, but may also advertise such post in the public service locally or nationwide. Ms. Williams, is that consistent with your understanding of the process?
That's correct.
Thank you. If we can then return to page 9 of your statement. And Ms. Williams, I'm happy to announce that we are basically at the end, and just in advance of the lunch break. Ms. Williams, you record at paragraph 33 the change in the ministers in April 2017, and you've already given evidence that after the appointment of Ms. Lodlo in the position of Minister of Communications, you were reinstated. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
What did Minister Lodlo do in relation to your outstanding requirement to be compensated at level 16 for the period that you were acting cabinet spokesperson?
Chairperson, one of the first things that I did was to also raise that there were these matters that were outstanding, and she approved, and then I was compensated according to the Public Service Commission.
At paragraph 34, you refer to a request that you received from Minister Lodlo in relation to Mr. Dipoko and Mr. Momeko. Could you tell us about that request?
When Minister Mtambi was transferred to the DPSA, she then wrote to the new minister, Minister Lodlo, requesting that the 2 officials be transferred, Mr. Donald Dipoko and also Mr. Zweli Momeko, made a request that they be transferred. In fact, one was to be transferred and the other one was to be seconded with immediate effect, which I did the paperwork to get them to be transferred to the DPSA.
Ms. Williams, what I envisage to be, my penultimate and then my final question. At the bottom of page 9, you talk about the period of time for which you have acted as DG of GCIS. How long has that been?
I think when I was calculating, I even shocked myself also. It came to about 58 months acting. That was subtracting the period of Donald Dipoko. In total, in the 6 years, I have been acting for 58 months.
And 58 months is 6 years? Or what is it?
Slightly less because I excluded
my arithmetic.
Just over 4 years, as I have it. 4.5?
Yeah, my arithmetic is bad.
Mine's very bad too, so I'm asking for confirmation from my learned colleagues. I think it's about 4.5 years.
That's
okay,
right.
all right, thank you.
Ms. Williams, over the page at page 10, you offer some concluding remarks in your statement. And you talk, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, about your commitment to public service. But you end at paragraph 39 in the last sentence with the following, and I quote, "As a result of the Minister Mutambi's behavior, an essential government institution that was built from 1998 was rendered dysfunctional." Ms. Williams, you'll recall in an engagement that I had with the chair earlier, I spoke about the insights that the experts who gave testimony on Friday provided to the Commission about the governance that is undermined within key institutions when state capture takes hold in a society. Could you please, with reference to that comment, give us a sense of the dysfunction that you believe occurred within GCIS during the period that you've testified about?
Chairperson, I indicated that we lost a lot of senior people. And she refused to fill those posts, resulting in people doubling up, people not doing certain things because they are short-staffed, and basically everybody was doing the bare minimum because if a section was meant to have 4 people and 3 are gone, virtually that one who's remaining will try wherever it is possible. It's just not going to work. And that's basically what was happening. If I can cite the example of the DDG of the section of media buying left. Mr. Dipoko, who was the media buyer, was elevated to being a DG. The remaining person was the director of media buying, who at the time was even new, and that whole section was almost dysfunctional. I should even mention that Minister Mtambi was quite even generous in giving people out to other sections. There was a chief director who was responsible for editing the Vukuzenzele that I spoke about. She almost like removed the person and he says, no, go and help in another department. And when we tried to say, Minister, this person is responsible for editing, and she says, no, it will happen. You see how you manage. And that's basically what she was doing, and completely rendering our provincial office in the Northwest, there was a vacancy. For a very long time, she never approved that post be filled. That office also became dysfunctional. And I'm just citing a few, but there were quite a lot of them that just completely couldn't function because there were no people.
You say she refused to fill posts. That doesn't make sense to me if there was funding for those posts. Are you able to say anything to me? I would understand if you were saying she wanted to fill the posts maybe with certain people, but to refuse to fill posts at all if there was funding for the posts doesn't understand it. I don't understand it. Do you understand it? Is there anything you can tell me that can make me understand it?
Chairperson, I was saying that for me, she was almost like working against the state. There was no reason why you don't want to fill the posts. It is in your interest that the institution should function correctly. There is funding. However, they had this narrative of wanting to prove that this GCIS people who are there are useless. We need to find other people who can come in and deliver. Phumla is not delivering because she's not effective. So they were almost like wanting to render the institution completely dysfunctional and find reasons to say, you know what, this acting of Phumla is not doing it for us. Let's find somebody so that she can then crack and make the difference in the organization, because there is absolutely no reason. There was funding, there was established posts, but she just preferred that it must disintegrate until they then say this institution is dysfunctional. We need to get other people to come in, and that's my interpretation. She might be having a different one, but my view is that they were trying to push the narrative that the institution needs fresh people.
Well, it would be helpful if you are able to, if you were to make available information that shows what posts were vacant during her time and were not filled, and how long they remained vacant. Is that information that would be easy to get?
Certainly, it's easy. I will arrange it and we'll hand it on.
Thank you.
Chair, forgive me. Just a few matters. I'd like to follow up on one question in relation to your testimony, and then, Chair, I'd like to address you in relation to notices to implicated persons, following from the evidence of Ms. Williams. I do note that we are at the lunch break time. Would it be convenient to break now and return?
Well, it depends what's going to happen after lunch. If there is no witness lined up for after lunch, I think it would be more convenient to finish with her evidence. You talk to me about the notices to implicated persons, and we adjourn for lunch and then not come back. But if there is a witness lined up for after lunch, then we can take the lunch break and then come back.
Chair, as I have it, there's no witness lined up for after lunch, and so with your leave, I will proceed.
Yes, no, that's fine. And in the meantime, Mr. Pretorius is excused.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, if I may just take a moment to confer with my colleague.
Thank you.
Chair, I've been reminded by my learned leader that the next witness is only scheduled for Thursday. He will be the witness that I foreshadowed in some of my questioning of Ms. Williams from National Treasury, who will look at the payments from GCIS and other departments to TNA Media and Infinity. So as matters stand, and in the light of your directions this morning, there will be no witnesses until Thursday at this point.
Okay.
Then, Ms. Williams, just to follow up on your testimony just before this interaction about the dysfunction within GCIS as a consequence of what happened after you were removed from the Acting Director General post around 2014. You've made some references to media buying. You've testified about Mr. Dipoko, who came from that department, brought into GCIS, as I have your testimony by Mr. Manyi, and then elevated from the Chief Director position to Acting Director General in your position. But can you comment on what happened to media buying as an institution within GCIS during this period of turmoil in relation to its governance, as I understand your evidence?
Chairperson, during that time, the media buying was operating outside. You remember I said that it was removed from the branch that was called CSA, Communication Service Agency. It was a standalone. So what was happening at that time, because prior to during Mr. Manyi's time, this unit was reporting directly to the DG. So what happened is that a lot of activities that was happening in media buying, they were doing it directly with the Acting Director General, Mr. Dipoko.
Thank you. Chair, those conclude my questions for Ms. Williams. Insofar as notices to implicated persons are concerned, Ms. Williams' evidence has, her initial statement resulted in 3 notices to implicated persons being sent out by the Commission's legal team. Her evidence today has gone, in some respects, broader than her statement, and so, as a legal team, we will give consideration to whether further notices, whether supplementary notices to those who already received notices, or notices to new individuals need to be sent out in accordance with the rules. We just wanted to place it on record that that consideration will be given, and where the legal team deems it appropriate, those notices will be sent out.
I think that's important to make that announcement, because I was going to mention that to the extent that any persons may find that a witness who is giving evidence before this commission implicates them in circumstances where prior to that they have not been served with any notices, they must know that in due course they will be served with notices. So people mustn't think that we are allowing witnesses to come before the commission and just make all kinds of allegations against them without us notifying them. So what is happening is that where the commission's legal team is aware from a statement given by a witness that certain people are implicated, they make sure that those people are given notices thereof, excuse me, are given notices thereof ahead of that witness giving evidence. But what may happen is that when a witness is asked questions during his or her evidence, he or she may implicate other people who were not implicated in terms of the statement. And in that case, the commission's legal team would take steps as soon as possible to notify those persons that they have been implicated. That is what you have just explained.
Indeed, Chair.
No, thank you very much. Ms. Williams, you said you are done with your questions.
I am indeed, Chair.
Ms. Williams, thank you very much for having availed yourself to come and assist the Commission with information and evidence that you have. For now, you are done, but the legal team of the Commission will be in touch with you at some stage with a view to you coming back, because the various persons who are implicated in terms of your evidence will be wanting to be given permission to cross-examine you. But arrangements will be made, and you will then come back. Is that all right?
Thank you. It's okay.
Thank you very much. We are going to then adjourn. From what I've been told, the next witness will be on Thursday, but on Wednesday at 10 o'clock we may be here in order to deal with applications by implicated persons who seek permission to cross-examine various witnesses. But that may or may not be moved to Thursday, 10 o'clock, depending on what will happen tomorrow. But those who might ultimately want to know whether Wednesday has been moved or will be moved must just be in touch with the legal team or the commission sometime in the course of tomorrow afternoon. So we will then adjourn.